Okay, working on this steering. If you ever pull apart a GMC or a Chevy van, express van, this is the claptrap that they use to make the steering work. It's got a universal, a slip joint, a rag joint, a second universal, a jack shaft, a third universal. I think this is some kind of a crush shaft, a fourth universal, and then a bearing. A column bearing. So this is the old column that I will adapt to the 55 column. So working on steering today. Usually honestly, this stuff, as claptrappy as it is there's no play. It's real nice and tight, and it lets you kind of bend it around the headers. So I end up making a bracket to hold this to the coil carrier on the chassis, and just kind of use this to go around the headers. And I got plenty of room in this truck, but on the first gen 47 to 54s, there's not as much room, and you kind of have to use these to go around the headers. But just using with what I got, everything's in good shape. I just cleaned off some of the rust. I'll shoot some paint on it, but it's all tight. So let's get this thing adapted to the column and see what we're looking at lengthwise, and get her so she steers. Alright, I got the first part of the column done. I was shooting for 28 inches from here to the firewall, which I got that. I almost screwed myself, but I forgot to put the seals back on, but this came apart, so I had to clean this up anyway. So, but that'll go mount right into the factory holes. This will bolt to the column. The steering wheel will be in the same height where it was, and this is as tight to the firewall to give me as much play to get this to work, because I was pretty tight here, so I think it'll work, but I might have to shorten up one of those jack shafts to get it to work. So we got a 52 column adapted to 2006 GMC parts. Alright, let's get it in the truck. Alright, the steering wheel's back in. Probably going to have to make a little bracket or something to tie this in or adjust that. We got to adjust it down a little bit, but it's a basic idea. We can move to the firewall side and get everything to line up and fit. Alright, I put the rest of the shaft in for the first time. I need to make it probably 1 to 1.5 inches shorter. Right now I had to jam the column up into the dash further than I want. So that was as best as I could guess when I measured my column length. And it's a little cozy, the header, so I'm going to pop that thing out and see if I can take out an inch or an inch and a half somewhere without too much work. So I ended up making it was 8 inches from here to here when I started, and now it's 6.5. So I was going to leave that slip, but I took so much of the spline out, I figured it probably could use the extra strength just to be welded, and we don't need it to be collapsible or anything. There's enough stuff in here that would explode the way that I'm going to use it if it got into a crash or whatever, which is probably what that was trying to do. Alright, made sure I drew lines, and it only fit one way because of the pins, but you know, that's in an effort to get my steering wheel as straight as possible, you know, with the column swap when the tires are straight, that the wheel's straight. You never get it perfect, but at least get it as close as possible so you can adjust it with the tie rods later if you really want. But alright, let's get this thing back in and then start looking at a mount to the coil bucket to get this thing mounted solid. I don't need this anymore. Welded on a little support bracket on the bottom of the column, keep it nice and solid. It was moving around. Alright, we got steering. A couple screws we're going to trim, but I guess we'll move on to see if we can stuff that booster in there. I gotta pull some of these lines off the booster and the steering box and see if I can straighten them out and make them a little bit longer. The distance from the box to the firewall is more than obviously what it was when it was a van, so we'll make it work. Alright, we got the booster mounted. Let's get those two lines back hooked up, and then we'll see if we can straighten out these brake lines a little bit. Kind of the beauty of this is I didn't disconnect the brake lines at all, so it won't need to be bled or anything. It's all good. There's like a flex lines here, so you got a little bit of wiggle room, and I'll straighten those out, make them look nice, and maybe attach them to something so they're not flapping around. But so we have the two high pressure lines to go, and the return for the reservoir. I'll make a new longer hose once that'll get mounted somewhere to this guy. That'll eventually. Alright, that wraps up the steering system. We got the hydro lines and the return line plumbed up and a bracket made for the reservoir. Alright, let's try to get this gas pedal in here. It's going to end up somewhere about there. Yeah, about 2 inches from the firewall up at the top where it starts at idle. So get that cable poked through about where I need it, and then build some kind of a bracket either off the tunnel or a box off the firewall. Alright, that wraps up the gas pedal. Looks good. Alright, we're going to work on the transmission cable next. This is what we got to work with. Find a hole to put that through the firewall that matches up with a hole in the dash, and then adapt my the PTO cable. These are the PTO cables that I use. I think it's like 22 bucks on Amazon. I just use the section here, and then I weld on some solid steel with a bolt that I can adapt to the GM transmission cable. Works pretty good. Perfect. Alright, that does it for the transmission shifter. Everything works good. Got park, reverse, neutral, drive, 2. Everything's nice and smooth and tight. Ready to move on. Alright, that's going to wrap up our pedal install. We got the Hydro Boost put in, the brake pedal assembly. We got our steering column and steering shaft to the box done. The hydro lines we got straightened out and kind of in their place. The brake lines are in there. We made a mount for the steering reservoir. We got the throttle cable in and the transmission shifter cable in. So that kind of wraps up getting our controls in, and we should be able to get this thing at least driving in the shop soon. So I think that's going to wrap up episode 12 on the 55, and we are going to start moving on some wiring, get a battery in this thing, and start doing like gauges and turn signal stuff, and just moving along on that so we can get this thing to shop drive. Alright guys, thanks for watching.